God bless my pastor, Bishop J.T. Gilder.
Good evening. I'm Chris Green. I'm the managing editor of the Journal, a civic issues magazine published by the Kansas Leadership Center. And I am zooming to you from Wichita, Kansas, actually inside KLC headquarters for a rare occasion tonight. Welcome to the Journal's launch of its summer magazine edition, The Price of Inequality. This is the first ever virtual launch that we've ever done. And so this is kind of a totally new experience for us. We use these launches to commemorate each one of our quarterly print magazines that comes out and when it's published. Tonight, we can't be together in person, and the magazine is actually still on the press, so if you're eagerly awaiting your copy to come in the mail, you'll have to wait till next week. But we do have the online edition of the story we're going to be discussing tonight out, and we're eager to start the discussion. Tonight we'll be hearing from interviewees to talk about the subject that we're here to talk about tonight, and we'll be engaging in some small group discussions and breakouts. And as some of you have learned already, we'll be using the chat feature on the side to ask questions, throw out discussions, anything that you don't want to sort of talk about with the large group. It's a chance to sort of get it on the table. We're here tonight to start a discussion about some of the losses that Kansas families have experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also what kind of leadership might be necessary to address the disparities that have been revealed over the past few months as many of us have sustained those losses. Tonight, we'll be discussing the life and death of Dr. Brandon McCray, who was a talented preacher and gospel musician who died earlier this year. But before we spend some time talking about him, I'd like to introduce him in a way that I think helps you get to know him a little better through a video that was produced by one of our staff members here at KLC, a very talented DJ Wetter.
Brandon was the ultimate big brother. He believed that he could win souls, he could win people over by simply dedicating his life to performing gospel music. He loved hard. He loved everybody, every aspect of his life. When it was a relationship, he really put his all into it. But that voice, that gift is silenced. They offered, they said, Jarius, you can come, and his son can come to the hospital. I was going to do it. My wife, who's a nurse, knew that it would be safe. But my family, my siblings, they said, don't do it. We don't want to lose another.
Dr. Brandon McCray was 52 years old, the 46th person in Wyandotte County known to have died from COVID-19.
But Brandon loved educating. He was a certified teacher, music teacher, had his master's degree in education as well.
Despite his many successes, McCrae worked as a substitute teacher and in other freelance jobs. He lacked health insurance until the Affordable Care Act passed.
66104 is considered one of those poorest zip codes in the state of Kansas.
Inside one of the state's poorest counties. As of mid-July, COVID-19 has taken 88 lives in Wyandotte. At least 41 were black. Statewide, Black and African American Kansans have been about 3 to 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than people of any other race or ethnicity. It shouldn't be this way, Jarius says, in KCK or anywhere else for that matter.
We seem to move almost when it's too late. That's a concern, not only here in Kansas, but it's a concern around the country. You see that. You see people of color, not only African American citizens, but you see my Latino brothers and sisters and our Native American, our indigenous people who are also getting hit hard by COVID-19.
The unified government of Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas has launched a health equity task force to combat not only the pandemic, but some of the underlying conditions that make COVID-19 so deadly there. McCrae's death reminds us of the stakes. His absence is not only a painful loss for his family, it's a loss for the community, who will no longer have his musical and teaching talents to inspire others.
Well, you're missing out on a person who was willing to sacrifice his comfort for the enjoyment of others. A person who had a gift that impacted people in such a broad level. We both believed that if it's going to change, if the community is going to change and the outlook of who we are in Wyandotte County is going to change, then we have to be the change agents.
Chris was going to ask you to get a little feedback in the room. Thane, are we doing these polls in the chat box or are we using a different function?
We're going to do the polls live here, so we'll start with the first poll, which I'm going to put up on the screen now. And you have an option to vote. And the question here is, do you know someone who has contracted COVID-19? And you can respond yes or no. Go ahead and vote.
One of the things we like to do at KLC events is get data in the room. I think a lot of you know that. We like to get data in the room, use the data from the participants. So we've got 2 questions to help us here. So please vote on this first one.
I'm going to go ahead and show the results now.
So a little snapshot of some data of those who are with us tonight. And now the second question, Thane, and then we'll make sense of these questions just a little bit.
All right. The second question will be around, do you know someone who has passed away from COVID-19? And again, we are close. I think 62 of now 70 have voted.
All right, so we have some data in the room about people's lived experience related to COVID-19. We wanted to start with those questions tonight because we're here to talk about losses, about people who've left us and who have in turn left voids in their families and in our communities. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, it's taken the lives of 335 Kansans, 63 of whom were Black. That's 3 times the rate white people like me die from the virus. To try to understand why this is happening and what kind of leadership will be needed to address the situation, we're here to talk about just one of those lives, that of Dr. McCrae, who died in April and who left behind a legacy of faith, music, education, and inspiration. For a variety of reasons, it's very hard to tell the life stories of those we've lost to COVID-19. And when we learned about Brandon's story, it provided us with an opportunity to help our readers of the journal understand this pandemic as being more than just about numbers. We want to recognize what's been lost and what we might need to start talking about to address some of the underlying issues, including systemic racism, that have made this pandemic affect people of color disproportionately. To get us into this conversations, we have some questions for Jarius, who's with us tonight, Brandon's brother. And let me just check with Thane real quick. Is Chris back with us now? And if so, I know Chris will love to interview you, Jarius, but if not, I love doing it as well.
According to the technology, he is not in the room. He's down the hall from you, but he's not in this room.
That's right.
So Ed, yeah, if you want to go ahead and start
By all means.
Conversation with Jarius.
By all means. Jarius, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of the story for the journal. We talked earlier today about that beautiful cover shot on the magazine of you memorializing your brother. Thank you for joining us tonight and being a part of this very, very important question. We appreciate you being here.
Well, Ed, I want to thank you. I want to thank the organization for, first of all, allowing me to be a part of this conversation. When I began speaking with, I believe it was Mark, it morphed into something bigger than what I had imagined, and I think what he had imagined also. But when you talk about a life such as Brandon's, Dr. Brandon McCrae's, it's very hard to capture it in just one moment. It's hard to capture it in one sentence. And so I appreciate you and the organization being willing to allow this story to be told. There's some very special people online right now that are here joining us. His godmother, who of anyone other than my mother, who's no longer with us, she had probably the longest lasting relationship with Brandon because that relationship started before he even entered this world. I see my sister, I see his son, I see his son's mother, his ex-wife, Marcy, that's on here, and others who are very close. So I really appreciate having this time to be able to talk.
Jarius, we want to thank you and thank all of your family, because you all are helping us have a conversation that is happening tonight, but also a conversation that the Kansas Leadership Center, our incredible partner, the Kansas Health Foundation, are very committed to. And this is a conversation about equity, about racial equity, and helping people understand what's really happening because of policies and practices that affect our communities and one another. Jarius, I got a couple questions for you. And my first question for you is, what would you like everyone to know about your brother?
Well, I think I said it in the video that he really was the greatest big brother a kid could have. Just imagine a brother, that your baby brother, as he so labeled me, even when I got my doctorate degree and matched his, it was still, this is my baby brother, Jarius. He protected me. He was a protector of all of his siblings. And he was one that looked out. He was the big brother of the neighborhood, of the three homes that were right next to each other, the Mobleys, the Joneses, and the Smiths. Brandon protected all of us. He was the eldest one. He loved his parents. He loved his grandparents. He loved his family. He loved those who were around him. And in our family and in the community, once you are introduced to someone, your family and life. And Brandon was a very passionate person, a very compassionate person. He believed, it's interesting that we're having the dialogue about equity. And as an educator and also just as a student and as one who experienced the inequities, Brandon really would be on this call speaking. If it were the roles were reversed, he would be speaking about closing the gap. Brandon believed that his role in life, especially as an educator, was to close that gap, to help bridge and provide a network for individuals to thrive and to develop. I think may have had a little chip on his shoulder because experienced individuals in high school when he began to develop a love for playing the saxophone, where his jazz band teacher told him he would not even be good enough to play across the hall. And Brandon played around the world. He played on continents around the world, playing in various settings, various religious settings. He could take Amazing Grace, as we heard yesterday at Representative John Lewis's funeral song. It doesn't matter what faith you believe in, but when you hear that song, it does something to you. And Brandon was able to take that song to a mosque and play it, and to get the same reception as he would in one of our very energetic Pentecostal churches. But he believed that there was a message and that we were messengers. That, I believe, was the biggest takeaway, that we were messengers. And he believed that every moment counted. Every time he played, he had to speak, and he had to speak something that dealt with life and living. And so that was who Brandon was.
Jarius, I'm going to throw it back to Chris here in a minute to ask the next question, but I just, we started with that poll question, the second poll question, the people who have known somebody who's passed away, and half of us haven't. Half of us don't know somebody right now who's passed away. And I want to thank you for helping, for those of us who don't know someone who's passed away, for helping this be more real to us simply by your presence tonight and the testimony of your brother. Chris, I'll let you ask the next question.
Well, thank you, Jarius, for all that you've shared about Brandon, and I've enjoyed talking to you, not just here, but for the interview we did, for the video and all that, and I'm sort of wondering, what do you think we can talk about tonight that would make a difference? That we could learn from what has happened to your brother and other people to make our communities healthier places to live?
Well, first of all, thank you, Chris, and you've been phenomenal throughout this process as well, and I appreciate it. When you think about where we are, and you think about the disparities, you think about the population of our country and the makeup, and as you said, African Americans are 3 times more likely to contract it and to possibly die from it, from COVID-19. You think of the disparities that are in our communities. This past Friday, I was fortunate enough to be on the closing ceremonies for the K-12 initiative through the University of Kansas Medical Center, where I serve as an instructor. The students were completing their summer institute, their summer academy, and the students shared their results, their studies over epidemiology, particularly COVID-19, and to see the young people, high schoolers, to become that informative, to become that involved, that interested, that knowledgeable about the effects of things happening in their own community and how people that look like them were disproportionately served, and that we are the ones that contracted and die of it more so. It was pretty telling. I believe the voice is going to come out of our young people, and it can start earlier. I am a middle school principal, so I'm always thinking from an educator's lens. I'm always thinking what our young people bring to the table. They bring in almost this untouched processing to where it hasn't been tainted. And I believe our young people have a lot to say. They are struggling. Their families are struggling. And to be an American, to be in America in 2020, for us to be over almost 250 years since the Declaration of Independence was signed, for us to still say that individuals don't have access to adequate health, to adequate food, to adequate resources to be sustainable is really an embarrassment, and it's an indictment. It's an indictment that I believe Dr. King's dream of almost 57 years ago, the check still hasn't been cashed. It's still bouncing. And there are people who are being left behind. There are people who are impoverished of all races and ethnicities. And people who are being left behind to fend for themselves. So what we can do, what we need to do, I believe, is that we need to bring the resources to where the people are. I mentioned that many years ago, I was introduced to this concept of communities and schools, or schools and community, and that our schools sit dormant for 2/3 of the day. And there's no one in there. There's no one in those buildings. Why not bring medical resources? Why not do what Wyandotte High School is doing with their program with KU Med, where they have medical students that come in and are there in that presence, in that space to help? Why not have it available after hours? Why not do what the program, the K-12 Initiative program does, where it has community gardens, organic gardens, where it's teaching young people how to grow your own produce, the significance of eating produce. And it's kind of cool to eat what you grow, but also it's healthy. We are not doing our job to make sure that individuals living within the boundaries of this country are really living the best. And so it's a shame when you see someone like a Dr. McCray, who's a very well-educated person, and he really wore that on his shoulder. He wore that as a badge of honor to become Dr. Brandon McCray. He went to the University of Kansas to become the Dr. Brandon McCray. We both set out on that journey, and we were both happy to do that. But it goes to show you, it doesn't matter what your education is. Sometimes certain things that should be available to everyone is not. And Brandon, unfortunately, suffered many years and went many years without. He made the choice to pursue the path of becoming a minister of the gospel, of playing a saxophone and ministering all over the world. And he became a substitute teacher. But with that, he had many years where he did not have proper health care. He didn't have dental care. And anyone that's a musician understands how proper it is to hold on to your teeth, to have your mouth taken care of. And Brandon struggled with that. He found out about a year ago that he had type 2 diabetes. He had other issues that were going on, high blood pressure. So you think many years without having the proper benefits to maintain your health, to improve your health. You think of that, and then you think of what this disease is doing, that it's taking the lives of those who have underlying issues, pre-existing conditions. So I believe that educating our young people at an early age, they can absorb the information. Educating them, kids do a phenomenal job of educating their parents. You begin working with the young people, you begin working with the parents, reaching out to them, making it accessible, making it so that it's not intimidating. As a high school teacher, I had parents that would not come to the school because they felt intimidated, because the teachers at times made them feel intimidated. Let's bring the resources to where the people are, where they're most comfortable. We have churches, we have religious organizations, we have some community organizations that can be brought on. We now have this world of Zoom. Who would have thought? Watching the Jetsons as a kid, you saw video conferencing, but who would have thought that we would have this medium and that we would be forced to use this to communicate with each other? There's so many things we can do to educate. Education, as our mother said, and our father said, and even my grandparents realized with their own children only having 7th grade educations, they understood that that education piece was important. It was necessary. And so we can bring things to where the people are who need it the most, who have the least amount of ideas, who have the largest amount of ignorance when it comes to that. And let people know that just because you're ignorant of something doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you don't know. And we're here to help push and to promote health in every aspect of a person's life. So somebody that looks like you, Chris, has to be able to say that someone that looks like me and Brandon, that our lives are important and that we are worth the time, the energy, the resources to make us a better people, healthy all the way around.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer, Jarius. And so what I think is really cool about what you said, when I put on like my Kansas Leadership Center hat and start thinking through like some of the competencies and some of the things I see reflected in your answers, the idea of starting where other people are, going to where they are, the idea of engaging different voices that are who are usually at the conversation. And one that really stuck out for me, and with your last comment, is exploring tough interpretations and exploring systemic interpretations. I think that there are narratives that can be useful in our society about we have to take responsibility for ourselves, but none of us are self-contained things. We're all influenced by those around us and the history that has created this, this world we live in, and our neighborhoods and our communities. And so, so thank you for helping us, see some of these bigger connections. Like, I think that's something that's really special about you, is like you can both honor Brandon's life and help us see the bigger picture. And one of the bigger pictures that I'd like to explore next is with the Reverend Tony Carter, who's part of an effort to address the situation that's affected Brandon and other people in Wyandotte County. And here to talk with him is our Director of Civic Engagement, Sean Rojas.
Hello. So I'd like to introduce Reverend Tony Carter from Salem Baptist Church in Kansas City, Kansas. Reverend, thanks for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Sean, for having me. I'm indeed honored.
All right, great. Well, so Reverend, you're part of an effort to respond to the COVID-19 through the United Government's Health Equity Task Force. What can you tell me about what you're doing and how you're dealing with the broader issues that you all are discovering?
Well, I am working with the Health Equity Task Force, and I consider that an honor and a privilege to be chosen to do so. That task force is made up of many groups that are concerned about the inequities and disparities that are occurring, have been occurring, and continue to occur in minority communities, especially the African American community, the Latino community, and the Asian populations. The Health Equity Task Force is made up of a lot of different groups, community organizations, community members, healthcare professionals, faith groups, and neighborhood rehabilitation groups. And we have been working together to try to create some energies to begin to address the disparities that are happening in our community, particularly related to COVID-19, but we're also hoping to continue working to have some long-term goals as well, to begin addressing all of the disparities that the African American and other people of color are facing.
So can you talk a little bit about some of the successes that you've had, and also what challenges you still face?
Well, again, I think we've been able to, with the task force, to formulate a synergistic group of concerned entities that have aggressively been attempting to provide the service that we need dealing with COVID-19. One of the successes I think we've had, probably the greatest success we've had, is providing free pop-up testing throughout the community with intentional efforts to target or to targeted communities, areas, and zip codes where the virus has hit the hardest. That's been one of I think our greatest successes, making access to those tests and making sure that those were free of cost to individuals and had no impact on their insurance. We've also partnered with various churches throughout the community. We've tested probably significantly higher number of residents per capita than any other metro jurisdictions. This task force has really worked hard. We built a large workforce of volunteer contact track tracers. We spearheaded the wearing mask campaigns. We built, provided training for those individuals, and that has been augmented by many multilingual tracers to serve the large Spanish-speaking and Burmese communities that have been, again, grossly affected by this disease.
And what about some of the challenges, Reverend Carter, that you all are coming up against?
You know, I think the biggest challenge, and Jerry has referred to it earlier, The biggest challenge is there is still so much distrust in the African American and Asian and Latinx communities that we're the last to begin to catch on and do the things that need to be done. And consequently, we suffer because of that. I think there's a challenge in this community, and the task force is helping us to begin addressing some of this. There's a challenge to create that level of trust. That's one of the reasons we involved churches and faith-based groups in this, because they have captive audiences and they can help us to get the word across and help us to reach populations that heretofore we've had problems with those groups trusting that we were going to do what we said we were going to do. And so far, it's been a great collaboration with the Health Equity Task Force, and all of these groups have really been a godsend as it relates to working synergistically together to create the kind of momentum that we're going to need to address this. But it's definitely been a challenge because there are still a lot of people, particularly in the African American community, who don't trust the test. They'll have symptoms, but they are afraid to get tested. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that. But that's one of our biggest challenges at this time.
Reverend, so what you all did with the task force is great, and I'm sure other communities would like to maybe try something similar. What advice would you give to other communities hoping to deal with the inequities as a result of COVID-19?
Well, the one thing that we've done is we've built a framework and worked diligently to increase the volume of services around this COVID-19. Did it in accordance with recommendations from the nation's foremost public health institutions, and we did it with unclear commitment of resources from foundations or governmental bodies. So I think, again, we could be a great resource for any community who is thinking about doing it, because we know the pieces that need to be at the table. We know all of the various entities and what they bring and what their strengths are and weaknesses. But together, we've been able to really create a consortium of people who have helped us to really face head on the issues surrounding this COVID-19. So we could be give great advice and leadership as relates to other communities, because we know who needs to be at the table, and we know the things that they need to. They won't have to make some of the same mistakes that we've made as relates to starting the testing and all of the other things. So we can be a great help in that relation.
Well, thank you, Reverend. Thanks for all the work that you all are doing there locally. So I'd like to hand this off to our CEO, Ed O'Malley. Ed, you want to take over?
Sean, I do. Thank you. And I want to just talk to everybody real quick, give you a heads up of what's coming next. So we're going to have a great conversation with Kiana Thomason from the Health Forward Foundation. And then we're going to get you talking. So those of you familiar with KLC know that we're not going to let you off the hook. And I'm going to tell you the question right now that we're going to have you focus on here in just a bit. And the question is simply, what does the exercise of leadership look like for you on this issue? Okay, that's the question that I'm going to ask you to wrestle with here in just a little while. What does the exercise of leadership look like for you? A lot of you are KLC alums. You're from all over the state and beyond, and you know that we think leadership is rare. We think leadership doesn't happen very often, and often people try to find ways to avoid exercising leadership because it's risky. And the question I want you to think about is, what does the exercise of leadership look like for you on this issue? We'll come back to that here in a minute. But first, Kiana, welcome to the Kansas Leadership Center. I'm sorry we're not welcoming you here in a jam-packed town hall room with wonderful folks from around the state, but thank you for joining us from Kansas City. We appreciate you being here, Kiana.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Kiana is the president and CEO of the Health Forward Foundation in Kansas City. Those of you familiar with the Kansas Health Foundation, Health Forward is a similar type of endeavor, a conversion foundation focusing on the 5 counties. I believe it's the 5 counties. Is that right, Kiana, that make up the metro area?
All of Kansas City and 6 counties.
6 counties, okay. Well, we are thrilled that you're with us. You have a career focused on health and wellness, and especially focused around health disparities. So we appreciate your voice in this conversation. My first question for you is, as when you think about what we've talked about so far tonight, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being we as in our society, our culture, our communities, we have 10 being we have everybody who needs to be involved at working this issue of health disparities, working the issue, and 1 being we don't have any of the right people involved. Where are we on that scale of 1 to 10 from your perspective?
Sure. Really quick, first I want to offer my condolences for the McCrae family and say thank you for sharing him with us, and heartfelt condolences go out to all of you who are on the call. So Ed, it's difficult to answer that question. I think 10 from the perspective that collectively we are all tooled with the resources, skills, and connections that we all need to collectively make the right impact together. From an outcomes perspective, when you look at COVID-19 mortality data for all of Kansas, but especially Black and Brown Kansans, and a host of other metrics of public health, like maternal mortality and infant mortality, we're at a 1 or a 2. We have a lot of work to do. So there's a lot ahead, and I think the question that you've posed to us to discuss in the breakout groups around what does the exercise of leadership look like is the right question, because we all have to use our spheres of influence to be the change that we want to see, as Jerry has mentioned.
Yeah, I'd love for you to expand on that just a little bit, because I noted when Jarius mentioned that as well, and I jotted it down. And I love the mindset, right? We got to be the change we want to see. And Kiana, you just added to that. You talked about how we need to be the change we want to see in our spheres of influence. What makes that hard for people? What gets in the way of people using their influence in their spheres to work this issue?
Yeah, I think oftentimes it's expecting someone else to do it. Someone else will figure that problem out. And as you mentioned, leadership is rare. And so many of us think of leadership as those who hold official titles of leaders. But leadership is really just influence. That's all leadership is. And when we think about our own spheres, we have significant influence in our families, in our neighborhoods, in the positions that we occupy for our professions and our vocations, in our churches, and certainly at the ballot box. So leadership can be demonstrated in so many spheres, and it's the right question that you pose. I'm looking forward to hearing the dialogue on that.
We're going to get to that dialogue in just a couple minutes, and the way this will work, folks, is we'll go to those small groups for Thane for about 10 minutes is what the plan will be. So we'll be on the way to those small groups in just about another 2 or 3 minutes. We'll be in the small groups for 10 minutes for you to explore what does the exercise of leadership look like for you on this issue. Implied in that question is the idea that you get to choose whether you're going to then exercise that type of leadership. But first, trying to describe what it looks like for you, what's needed from you, given your sphere of influence. Just describing what's needed, what it could look like, implied is the question, well, you'll get to choose whether you will exercise that leadership. Kiana, two more quick questions for you. People who would come to an event like this that was advertised and marketed as focusing on inequities related to race and systemic racism and things going on in our society. My guess is most of the people who would come to a conversation like this know that what we're talking about is important and believe in it and think of themselves as on the right side of this issue. My quick question for you is, how are we, those of us who are here tonight, a part of the mess, how are we contributing to the current reality in the situation today? And you have the permission. You don't have to be super nice if you don't want to, but because I think we got to be real. We got to be real, and we can't just pretend like the problem is just with other people. So how are we a part of the mess? Those of us who would even come to an event like this tonight to engage in this discussion.
Yeah, I think some of that has to do with our trepidation around calling things out as they are. Just being very plain about what's happening. I've heard the word equity so many times over and over again. But finally, we are hearing race equity put in front of the word equity. So we need some courage. We need folks to become comfortable with being uncomfortable in the hopes that we will grow comfortable and grow in exercising new muscles around talking about race equity. Because at this juncture, if we in our own spheres of influence do not ensure that race equity is centered in every conversation, in every decision, in every policy, and in every practice that we collectively have responsibility and ownership for, then we are the problem. So we must do that, not just our healthcare system, but obviously our healthcare system, but all the other systems that we on this call touch. So the question is, how does this decision that we are deliberating on, how does this new practice, this new opportunity advance racial equity? Who benefits, not just who receives it, who benefits from it? Okay, following the dollars of who benefits, yeah, and who's included in that conversation. I think it was Dr. Carter who mentioned one of the attributes that I love of the Health Equity Task Force. They are getting proximate to the problem. They have engaged direct community organizations, grassroots organizations as trusted messengers in the community who hold the honor and the respect and the trust of the community to engage the community in Wyandotte County around testing and tracing. So it means linking up with partners that we have traditionally excluded from systemic planning and solutions. And it's being okay with saying and owning that there are systems and structures that have been in place for centuries that have advantage economically and from a power, money, and resources perspective, white people. So now it's time to take a redistributive and reparative stance and ensure that our decisions, our policy making all the way down to the neighborhood level, and the roles that we occupy in organizations are advancing people of color.
I love the word reparative. You used that earlier today on our prep call, and I noted that, and I really like everything that conveys, and I think it's powerful. Last quick question for you, and Thane, we're gonna go 9-minute breakouts if it's not too late to change that. So I need a quick super answer, Kiana. Sometimes on big issues like this, people struggle to know, what does winning look like? What does success look like? Can you, in one sentence or two sentences, describe, at the end of the year 2021, so a year and a half from now, if we've been successful, we as Kansas City, we as Wyandotte County, we as Kansas, if we've been successful, describe how we would know a year and a half from now. Paint a picture of success just a year and a half from now.
Well, a year and a half from now, we can begin to look at certain measures, right? Look at our data. And understand how we've moved the needle with respect to certain measures in health and in community wellness. Bottom line is racial equity defined means the state in which one's racial identity has no influence on their ability to thrive. And so with that definition in mind, let's use that and apply it to some core metrics and measures at the community level.
I love it, Kiana. Thank you. So, all right, we've tried to set up an agenda today of catalytic conversation. So we hope you've been been catalyzed, and now it's time for conversation. Again, the question for you to explore is, what does the exercise of leadership look like for you on this issue? Please engage in your small group. There'll be no KLC facilitator there, so facilitate yourselves. We know you can handle it, and we look forward to seeing you back here in about 9 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, coming back from your small groups. I know that wasn't enough time. And I hope it was enough time to catalyze some of your thinking. And what I would ask you to do right now is using the chat box. We just have a few minutes left, but I'd love for you to share the exercise of leadership you either articulated or that you heard that really stood out to you. I'm not asking you to call anybody out. I'm not asking you to make a commitment. I just would love to see in the chat box and have a record for us to be inspired. I'd love for us to see the different examples of what the exercise of leadership could look like for people on this issue. Again, not asking you to call yourself out, not asking you to identify anybody else, because that's a personal decision whether they want to exercise leadership. But let's see what it looks like. Let's see what you came up with. You all know, especially many of you who are deeply connected to KLC, that KLC exists to help more people not just have the passion to care about issues like these, not just have the knowledge about issues like these, but to have the skill and the courage to actually intervene on these issues. So we'd love to see what you came up with. And it looks like a bunch of stuff is coming in the chat box now. Please keep them coming. I'd love it if everybody could type something. Everybody type something that you heard or that you said that describes what the exercise of leadership looks like in a conversation on this issue. We're down to just our final minute or two. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this conversation. I want to thank our guests who helped catalyze our thinking tonight. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time and your energy. I want to thank the Journal team. Chris, you and your team have done it again. You've produced a phenomenal issue to catalyze conversation across the state. And thank you for that. Before we officially sign off, Chris, any final words from you? And then I'll offer a quick closing here.
I wanted to mention that we'll be closing as we opened, listening to Brandon's music, and to look for your journal to come in the mail in the next week or so. And hope you enjoy the print experience as much as the digital one.
Thank you for that, Chris. And I love seeing what's coming in the chat box. Please keep them coming. We'll leave the chat open for just a little while, Thane, if that's okay. We're going to end the program here in just a few seconds, but we'll leave that open if you want to add some more thoughts or read thoughts. I want to remind people that what we know is that progress on adaptive work, and it's hard to imagine a more adaptive challenge than what we've been talking about tonight. Progress on adaptive work requires leadership from the many, not the few. It requires a saturation of our communities and our organizations and our state with people who understand the skill of exercising leadership, no matter their position, and have the courage and fortitude to do so. KLC exists to help you and others do that. Please let us know how we can support you on this journey, how we can support your exercise of leadership. Thank you again to our guests, and good night, everyone. Thank you. Be well. Take care.